Today we're going to have a look at servicing an older colour TV. This is an old twin rotary tuner one. It's a Thorn 38T1 is the model number. Quite a rare size, this one. So 38cm viewable is what the model number means, which I think it's a 420 tube they used in these. Quite a rare size in Australia. Normally the ones that sold the most were the 14-inch or 34cm, and then like the 28-inch, 48cm, 51, etc. above that. This also would have probably come out as a AWA branded television. Basically they're all made by Mitsubishi, and quite a good chassis in these. I'm not exactly sure, I can't remember all the chassis numbers now, but this is I think an H or a Q, probably a Q chassis. One of the later sort of flat board ones. Pretty sure that's what's in it. I'll have to actually open up to make sure, but it's not heavy enough to be one of the K or N chassis. I don't think. It's a bit later styling to be one of those. They had a bit of an older look to them, but they basically started out with a G chassis, and yeah, then it was a K and N. They were both similar to each other. I'm not sure what order they came out. I guess if it's alphabetical order, it'd be K and M, but then there was also an H chassis, which was a fairly much a flat board kind of chassis. The earlier ones were like metal chassis with multiple boards on them. The G chassis was the earlier one back to around 1975. The first Mitsubishi made Australian AWA Thorn TV, and that had plug-in boards, which would cause a bit of trouble. Quite an early chassis, quite large, lots of big heat sinks and all that sort of thing. I think it had a separate power transformer in it. This probably still has a separate power transformer. I can't remember if don't think these were live chassis, any of these, up until about the ML chassis or something. Then the K and N chassis were a bit more compact than the G chassis. Don't think there are any plug-in boards, just a few reasonable size, sort of medium-sized boards screwed around the metal framework. Then they started going to the flatter ones. I think pretty sure there was something called the H chassis, which I really didn't see many of, if any of. For some reason they weren't very common. I think they were one main board and some smaller stuff. Then there was the Q chassis, another fairly flat one, line output transformer all in one piece, everything on the main board, which I think this one's going to contain. Quite a reliable TV normally. And yeah, then they went, I think the ML might have come after that, which was a much more modern looking kind of chassis into the 80s, or mid 80s by then I guess, mid to late 80s even. And they went to a few other, I can't even remember what the chassis were after that. I think there was something with an S in it and God knows what. But we'll have a look at this one. I've actually got it tuned in at the moment. It's running fairly well. The tuner in it's a bit dicky. Not so bad on this channel, but you can sort of see if you tap on it, we've got a little bit of volume there as well. That's alright. So, but if I knock on that, it comes and goes a bit. That's not the actual channel, but you can see it's picking up sidebands or whatever, and it comes and goes. Other thing I noticed, it's fairly soft around the edges, so the focus is not right there. We might be able to get that a bit better, but the tube may be getting soft in this thing. So we'll just give it a general looking over. There are a few controls on the front here. You've got your automatic fine tuning on off, sharpness, colour and brightness level, that must be. I guess if we put it back on the pattern generator, I think that's picture. What they call picture is contrast. And if we go to a grayscale, come on pattern generator, give me a grayscale. That might be the switch that's dicky in that thing. It's not going to grayscale. If we do the brightness level here, we can just see the last grey bar there, which probably isn't too far off. Sometimes I'll give them a little bit of a tweak just to make it a tad brighter than that. And yeah, colours are right. The grey looks pretty grey. Maybe it could be tweaked ever so slightly, so could do a little bit more blue. It's almost a bit reddish and greenish, but it's almost a matter of taste really. But I would say that actually probably should be a tad bluer. Where normally you can set both the darker colours and the lighter, highlights and lowlights. To try and get that, it's bound to be a little bit out. And yeah, contrast seems to work alright. I haven't tried the UHF tuner yet, but chances are that'll be working fine as long as you can turn the knob on it. These you just flick it round to usually the channel below 0. And the fact that picture's changed a bit, means it's probably working. Some of the earlier TVs in Australia, it wasn't too, I can't even remember when SBS came out, around the mid 80s maybe, 85 or something, but we didn't have any UHF channels. Some people did have things like Commodore 64 computers they could use on UHF, but even those were more around the mid 80s. So if you had a 1975 odd television, the UHF tuner never got used, and some of them, I think the HMVs and the Sanyos, the grease would dry up in them and they'd actually seize up by the time people wanted them. Sort of getting towards the later 80s and stuff, you couldn't get the tuner to work anymore. I think most of them were seized that solid. I did try pulling some of the bits and you couldn't get the shaft apart to do it easily. But these later ones, and just certain brands, I think the Mitsubishi ones were always alright. A lot of the TVs came out without a VHF tuner, but this may want a few dry joints and stuff doing. I think it's probably best to pull the tuners out. I'll give them a contacts a clean. Also, I think a couple of these pots down here are a bit dicky. I'm not sure if this chassis had them mounted. I think some of them had them mounted on the actual circuit board, so that might be as easy as sliding the chassis back. But I think what I might even do to start with is, I'll probably turn that back on, didn't I? I better turn it off at the power point. Is pull these knobs off. Thank God these ones come off nice and easy. I forgot some of these. I always used to remember them being quite hard, some of these TVs, but those are fine. So I'll take all those knobs off and I'll spin it around, take the back off, and then we'll have to unscrew this front panel, usually just a metal plate with all the tuners and the switch pots and stuff. And then we'll see about, sometimes these are on a separate panel, but I'm pretty sure this one only half the controls is showing through, so I think these later chassis, to save wiring and stuff, much cheaper at the factory to build it and quicker if everything was mounted on the circuit board. So we'll have a look at that. Guess we might as well have a quick look at the back before I even take it off. So it's got some inbuilt antennas here, a couple of telescopic antennas. Look like they're still alright, so they probably never got used, those ones. And they come down to this bit of ribbon cable, just goes up to these two antennas. Comes out to a 75 to 3 or 300 ohm, I guess, 275 ohm balun. Well, even says 300 ohm to 75 on there, since it's going from a 300 ohm ribbon cable on the antennas to the power type socket. So what does it say? Disconnect VHF internal aerial leads when a 75 ohm external aerial is connected. Well, I don't know how you connect an external one without doing that. So it's basically telling you to unplug this if you want to plug in an external antenna. Usual warning about the Australian standard that you've got to install your antenna to. Disconnect from mains before attempting to gain access. Do not obstruct ventilation. AC supply only. So it's a Thorn MR380. I don't think that relates to the chassis, but it could do. But I don't think they ever made an MR chassis. But I get a feeling some of them did have stuff here that was rated. So 38T1, also got that over here, made in Japan. So this one was fully imported. I think some of their bigger sets, they made the cabinets in Australia and just fitted all the tube and everything from Japan into them. So this one was a fully imported one. So we'll take this back off. It's only, I think, 4 screws and it just pulls off. These are nice simple ones to get off. Now, one thing to watch with CRT TVs, it's probably not so bad. I've got it sitting on the bench here, but if you've got it hanging over the bench, always be careful when you take the last screw out, because these back covers will drop on some of them. And if you're not careful, they can drop enough to actually knock the back off the picture tube, which of course is sticking out in this lumpy bit. And there should be some sort of connection here. So this one's got 2 wires to the 2 tuners, so this has got the older style antenna socket. You can undo these little clips and stuff and pull the wires off the tuners. They're just RCA ones. Undo that little clip. Absolutely filthy in here, as is usual for these TVs. Undo this other clip. That's how dirty my hands are getting, just do it, and we can take that right off. Or the other option, of course, is just unscrew the socket from the back of the back cover, because often what I might even do is do that and then I just leave it floating around, just making sure the metalwork can't touch anything else and short it out. So, because then you've got just one socket to work with rather than trying to connect into these RCA sockets. So as you can hopefully see, there's a couple of tuners up here. They're mounted on a metal bracket along, like I say, with the switch pot and the contrast pot. Power transformer here. I thought they had a power transformer in these still. There's our picture tube, and it is a 420 GNV22. Don't think they ever gave dates or anything on these. Bit of serial number, there may be a date in that serial number somewhere if you knew how to read it. And same with the serial number for the picture tube, made in Japan. Just the same Thorn sticker that was on the back, and I think this is a Q chassis. Should have a white, and it's actually a black transformer. I thought they were white, but these smaller ones may be different. It's got the white focus pot, a couple of TO3 transistors on the end. I'm not sure when this was made, but somewhere between the early to mid 80s. They were still making some of these rotary tuner sets reasonably late. This chassis also came out with push button Varactor type tuners. I'll slide that back. Normally best to take this picture tube board off, so you're not pulling on it and risking breaking the tube. Now that's got it looks like an earth wire here, which can be unplugged, but you've got to be careful about plugging it back in if you do. Or we can undo this little twist tie thing here, just to give it a bit more length. Probably find out, yeah, there'll be a thing holding the EHT lead up there. Looks like there's another one holding the yoke wire a bit short here. The potentiometers are on this board, and the other one here that's really holding this board back is what I assume must be the yoke connect, the degaussing coil connection, which it is. Degaussing coil, of course, can be unplugged and left out while you work on the TV, but it's super important to remember to plug it back in when you're finished. And we've got another something holding this lot together. I thought you undid that one and it would come loose, but it's not really any length there. But it's, yeah, undoing a couple of those has helped it come a bit looser. And then you can sort of get the chassis out. If you need to work on it, we can get it up. Just being careful at the end of that picture tube. The yoke's still a bit tight. Might have to undo the twist cable on that one, which also does that earth wire on the picture tube to the aquadag of the picture tube, so that should help with that. And then we can get underneath this chassis. So we've got some of the sections labelled, and it's worth checking for dry joints, particularly the horizontal drive transformer, which is around here somewhere. That's the line output transformer, or flyback transformer as they call it, FBT. That would be the drive transistor transformer there, sorry, because the transistor's up on the heatsink here. So I've got a couple of output, or probably a voltage regulator and a horizontal output. I may have to refocus that a bit. Wrong control. That's a bit better. So we've got an SDR 371 voltage regulator, caution high voltage, and some Japanese writing, IC 991, and 2SD 869 horizontal output transistor here. Very common for this sort of age TV. Those actually got a damper diode built in from memory, some sort of diode in there. So they were a bit different to the earlier TO3 transistors that didn't have a diode in them, like the 2SD 350s, I think they were. I'm almost starting to forget some of these things that I knew off by heart. And there's a picture tube socket. Everything's absolutely filthy in here, this is what pretty much every CRT television used to look like. You just got dust everywhere because of the static around EHT here is attractive of dust particles, but also they basically get a bit of a convection current through these things because they're warm, and you've got lots of ventilation slots and stuff, so the actual air in the room would circulate around, probably up the wall, and cool down and come back down, get sucked through the TV again, leaving any dust inside the TV quite often through the static, or just through contact, I guess. But this is very common, and you'd end up with dirty hands like this. When I was servicing these all the time, I used to just have a old Electrolux vacuum cleaner under the bench with just the hose on it, no carpet fitting or anything, and I'd just kick that into action and just basically get the hose up here to suck, and a paintbrush, and I might even show you how that's done. I guess I can grab the vacuum cleaner and just so you don't make a mess everywhere. Of course, you could take it outside or something and blow it out with an air compressor or something, but it makes so much mess, and you don't know where you're actually blowing stuff into the speaker or into the tuners or something. I think it's usually safer. You don't have to clean them thoroughly. You just want to clean all this muck off so you can actually see what you're doing, and you don't get filthy hands from touching every part of it. That's about the only reason. They don't need to be 100% clean. Some people, I think, actually pull the chassis out and wash them, which you can do. A bit of water on this, as long as you dry it out straight away, is not a problem. But you can actually wet these things and then quickly, you know, keep them warm to hot, dry them out straight away, and they'll usually be fine. I had to do it occasionally with TVs where they had smoke damage due to a house fire, and the only way you could get the smell out of them was to clean absolutely everything. You probably wouldn't even manage it with one of these wooden TVs, but the plastic cabinet ones, if you cleaned all the back of the picture tube, all the inside of the cabinet, took the chassis out, washed it all off, usually you get the TV back to not smelling like horrible burnt house smell. So there were times we actually did do it, but normally for a set like this, you'd just do it so you can see what you're actually working on, and you're not getting dust and filth all over your bench and all over yourself. And it was kind of a thing, customers used to think that dust causes issues, but generally these TVs would run probably full to the brim with dust. Didn't seem to worry them, but you know, things like these old rotary tuners, that probably could be a bit of dust in those that's affecting the contacts in them. And things like speakers can sometimes be a little bit affected. Sometimes with like some of the Philips sets and stuff, with the dust around here, they had the hard plastic tripplers in them, the little alter cap part, the bit that sits on the tube, and they would peel up, and of course dust would conduct the EHT across. You'd get arcing and stuff, but they would often arc even just into the air, but dust certainly helped it make it even worse. But those ones you had to seal up with a bit of silicone because the tripler went hard, whereas these, like Japanese sets, most of them have a more silicone style rubber there, and they seal up really well. Virtually never you get these play up, but I have actually had them where maybe being in a damp house or something, the moisture will get underneath these, and you'll get like a carbon track burnt into the rubber, and then it would come out and arc across the back of the tube. So you could clean that up, or sometimes you might have to replace the whole line output transformer or something. But very rare you'd ever see any of these Japanese ones play up. Yeah, well, that took a bit longer than usual. And this TV still has a bit of muck on the board. Looks like it may have had water. Yeah, I think it's just had water in it because it's stuck the dust to the board. But it does rub off pretty easily. Normally if it's a drink or something went in there, it'd be a lot better stuck on than that. This brush hasn't got everywhere. It definitely looks like it's been out in the rain at some point. You can see it on the yoke there and stuff. but gets it reasonably clean. Normally they would have, if there's been no water or anything on it, it'll come up even cleaner than that, usually almost perfectly clean. And unfortunately, while I was stuffing around, I broke the AFT switch off, but a little bit of wire and a bit of iodide will fix that. So you do have to be careful of these things. So I might just give this a quick look over. Basically got one, we've got a big M51393 chip there, which would be the colour decoder and stuff, because looks like probably a luma delay line, chroma delay line, LA7800 I think was the sync chip, a couple of vertical output chips there, it's got def written next to it for deflection, and that's the M5186, I think that's your IF, have to be by the look at that, it's got all the IF cans around it. One more little chip up here, which I can't remember, is that audio or something? Probably is, I think. M5144, I think that says, I reckon that's probably the speaker connector and audio output transistor or something there, maybe. Don't think I ever had an audio issue in these. Main problems, like any TV, deflection and power. One thing I didn't really do was clean off under here. I should have just give that a quick light dusting under there. Bit more than I thought coming off there, but so you do get a few dry joints in some of these, probably not so much these smaller sets. Looks like this one may have been resoldered, so you will get like potentially dry joints around these vertical output transistors. I know I had one of these chassis where the dry joints on the horizontal drive transformer, and that, because the horizontal drive wasn't running, it caused the voltage in the vertical to go high, and a couple of the capacitors to pop their tops a bit in the vertical. Other than that, I don't really remember any faults with these. If you do get dry joints on things like the line drive transformer or line output transformer, and people just bang on them to get them going again and stuff for a while, it can blow the horizontal output transistor. Pretty sure I've replaced the horizontal output transistor in these, possibly the voltage regulator as well, even something like a power issue, power line issue, or lightning strike or something can take that sort of thing out. Don't think the line output transformers really failed in this chassis. Pretty sure they were always still good in these TVs. Generally these chassis almost outlived the picture tubes most of the time. But the picture tubes too were pretty reliable in these things and lasted a long time. But I don't think it's even really worth checking. Generally the electrolytic capacitors in these were good quality, Rubicons by the look of it. They just basically, unless it was a fault that caused them to die, they generally went forever. Got two fuses on the board here. I think that one over there is your main 240 volt fuse. This may be a secondary one. Secondary part of the power supply or something. I've got a connector starting to come out there, so that's something you've got to watch when you've been pulling on these chassis and flipping them into the service sort of position. You will often find plugs start coming out if you're not careful, and that can cause intermittent issues or something else to stop working. I think generally the solder joints in this look pretty good. Someone's gone over it, that one on that vertical output doesn't look 100%. I think the line drive's still got original soldering, but I may give that a quick going over a couple of those joints just to make sure it doesn't hurt. And while that soldering iron's warming up, I'll give these pots down the front of the board here for the whatever it was. I think it was brightness, colour and sharpness or something. Often there's a little indent on the top of the metal on the front of them, and if you give that a squirt of switch cleaner lubricant down in that hole. These are nice and simple, these Japanese ones, that goes right down inside them. You can squirt it up from underneath sort of thing, and then just give them a few turns. Given the amount of dust in this chassis, it's pretty impressive that these potentiometers worked as well as they did, really. And sharpness has got a central indentation. One was brightness, I think the other was colour, was it? No, colour was, no, picture, yeah, contrast was the one on the front panel, so one of these must be colour. Give that a bit of a run. Must be a PTC, there it is for the degousing. I don't think they ever got dry joints in this. Some chassis, some TVs would get dry joints on those. Always something to check, but I think this Mitsubishi might even... Is that it? No, it's over here somewhere. Possibly it's that PC thing there, and they've used those little eyelet things they put on the boards. Or is that the connector? That would be the connector actually, where they're spread out. Oh, so that's the PTC there. They've actually bent the leads out on it, which is another good thing to mechanically hold it a bit tighter. So that's all good stuff to make the set more reliable. And of course, from their point of view, they don't want any recalls or anything, because those sort of things can be potential fire hazards, cause the TV to actually catch fire or something, at least in rare circumstances. So they didn't want any of those sort of hassles and the brand damage it caused. So the Japanese were pretty good at over-engineering things a bit, but we saw these vertical output transistors. One of them was definitely a little bit iffy. This one's got a pin here, that one there's not 100%. Always check your line output transformer. These are all very good, plenty of solder on them from the factory, so no issues there. I'll resolder this little drive transformer just for the hell of it, because they were a common cause of faults. I'd say they've got plenty of life in those joints, but they are definitely not perfect. I don't think they're slightly on their way out. There's no actual transistors on the board in the power supply, or not high current ones. There's really not much else actually. There's something I can see, of course, there's a few of these resistors around the line output transformer and vertical and stuff been obviously hot, and that's definitely got iffy looking joints on that one. What's that, R416? This other big one here is fine. You often find a few that'll be probably one of those green wire wound. It's a red one, but like a 2 or 3 watt type cylindrical bodied one. They often these TVs have something, a few of those in there, and they'll run quite hot. Similar to these sort of grey ones on the neck board. So a few watts. And the neck board's always worth a check as well. I can actually see a joint there that hasn't been, only been half soldered in the factory. It's on actually one of those resistors. Or is it? No, it's on a different one. And always worth checking these RGB output transistors. Those ones look a bit cracked, so you'll have these flat pack type, is it TO126 case? Jeez, I'm starting to forget all these things. Which are an NEC 2SC2688. I think they're okay, but they do look a little iffy. Probably just the factory soldering doesn't look 100%, just because sometimes it doesn't, and the wave soldering machines. But they would normally be something, because they run quite hot, these transistors, and they're sort of hanging out on that neck board where they're a bit more prone to vibration. So I would normally go over those as routine maintenance. A little bit iffy. Sometimes you get this weird fluxy stuff on the board, which may be why they look a bit funny like that. I think it's actually got a coating or something on this board. Yeah, the whole thing's almost got like a lacquer over it. So that's making them a little difficult to resolder. Ideally that probably wants scraping right off, but you can usually sort of burn through it. And I forgot some of these used to have stuff like that on them. I don't know what that was about, whether it was meant to insulate them a bit better or something and stop high voltage arcing over. But yeah, that's really quite difficult to solder onto. Probably doing more bad than good in a way. And anything else I need to check? Generally the wedges on the yokes and stuff in these were good quality, because some TVs the wedges will go oily and the synthetic rubber starts breaking down or whatever, and it actually eats into the windings where it's touching on the yoke. So certain Korean TVs and stuff, you normally replace those. Often you can, there's about 3 of them, you can pull them out and just put the one at the top back in, and it'll keep, the geometry will still be fine and stuff. But these sets are generally good. These are actually a good source if you're ever scrapping these sets. Always keep the wedges, especially if they're the white coloured ones. The black ones can sometimes be iffy, but generally not in the Japanese sets. Where on earth did that plug into? There's the little thing. Oh yeah, it's right next to the PTC, labelled PC. Yeah, so we've done all that. I can start actually putting this all back together. And actually there's another thing worth checking, is these, we've got a spark gap here on the focus, so I've missed a bit of the dust on that. Those spark gaps, this little blue thing here, they're just 2 bits of metal with rounded ends. If they get dust on them, they can arc across when they shouldn't, but that's going from the focus to ground basically. It's just in case there's some problem, some bit of metal or something in the tube or whatever's playing up. And if it arcs, it just means it arcs to ground. It doesn't go back down the cathodes or something and blow the RGB driver transistors or something like that. I forgot these sets still actually had one of those in them, so that was all the later TVs, that's long gone by then. More the earlier sets, I used to have them on pretty much every pin of the picture tube. Sometimes they just have a little, you'll see little copper, bare copper tracks around the pin, the socket, pins of the socket going in the tube, and one side of them will all be joined to earth, and they're just made to, so there's a little gap for the any high voltage shenanigans in there to arc across, because sometimes these tubes will pop it and carry on, and I'm not exactly sure what's going on in there, but some bit of metal that shouldn't be in there or something shorted something out or done something, and it will just be like a temporary blip, but it can blow parts if it's not dealt with, and the best way to deal with it is to short it to the ground. Yeah, next part's to try and get these tuners out. Now this can be a little bit more difficult. Obviously you've got to take all the knobs off like I already have, and then there'll usually be around 4 screws holding this front panel into place. Definitely want a long and magnetic screwdriver. I mean, you can get away without it, but it makes life a hell of a lot easier. I'm not sure if I'm going to have to take this transformer out or anything, because I don't know, see where the wiring goes, whether we can get this to pull out enough to get to it easily. I probably could spray these tuners as they are, or I won't do the UHF, they don't normally need doing. And even these pots I can definitely get into the back of that one. It's got a nice little slot there. This one it's probably got a slot under this plastic cover a bit, but to do them properly I like to actually remove them from the TV set, or at least get them off the front panel. So we've got 2 more screws up the top here, pretty much a standard setup. Just got to watch they don't drop down. Sometimes you've got to jiggle them a bit to get them out of the plastic front. There we go, that's the 3rd one. And 1 more over here. But if you can actually get the cover off the tuner is the ideal. We'll see how easy this one is to get off, but they should come off easily. Of course this has got a couple of light up dial bits there that are now sort of hanging free. I'll probably have to undo this little twisty thing at a minimum, and otherwise seem to go down past the speaker there, so I'm not sure how the ones for the pots, but just be sort of careful because those bits, the dials want to drop off, and of course here this transformer is in the way a bit. I'm not sure. There is a clip under here on these plastic things attached to the chassis. If I can get that off, I may be able to. And of course there's one up here that's actually in my way. Maybe able to just jiggle this enough to. These actually want to clean anyway, these things. They sort of line up with the, although this one probably won't because that's attached. The VHF one should line up just with the knobs again. The UHF one, not so much. There's our tuners. give that a quick clean. You probably can't really notice it from the TV. I've got a bit of metal there, which isn't ideal. I need to get my other cleaner, I think. Probably should just use some water. I might even do that, use the soldering iron and water and just give that a quick clean off. I think it's got a bit of a gooey coating on it. Might be a bit oily or a bit of cigarette tar or something. Not uncommon for TVs to have a bit of a coating or something in the dust, because along with dust they tend to attract smoke and any other particles. For the same reason, the convection heat, currents and the static electricity was just an absolute magnet for cigarette tar. I've seen some absolutely smelly, disgusting TVs over the years, so not only do you have the dust, it's also infused and stuck to tar and stuff. It's absolutely terrible sometimes for some people. Even wood heaters too, the smoke from them and dust from them certainly gets stuck into these things, but not as bad as a heavy smoker who smoked indoors and didn't ventilate it well. So now I've got a spring trying to escape here. I better put that to one side and remember to put that back in. I guess actually the back of these needs doing too. Should have thought of that. Where the light comes through, and probably the light themselves. Look at the neons in this TV. This is why they're that nice orange colour. Some TVs use dial or incandescent globes, which would blow. That was absolutely filthy on some of those channels. And this does look like it's got a bit of a, you can tell that sort of yellowy brown colour, cigarette tar or wood heater smoke or something. But no matter how clean people's homes were, they always look like this inside. So the lady of the house wasn't always all that impressed when you opened up a TV in a nice clean lounge room, and it was pretty much as filthy as this thing on the inside. Gave them a bit of a shock, but I won't say upset when you, or worried when you explain they're all like that. But these little neon lamps, I'll give them a clean, they're pretty filthy. Probably make them just that little bit brighter, though they will tend to dim with age. So what I can do, oh yeah, there is a slot in the top of this switch pot I can just get the contact cleaner into on the tube there. I'll give that a squirt, try and get it in there, that's it. And I can get to the actual contacts underneath. There's a slot where this little bit of Bakelite with the connection lugs goes in. Don't know if I need to clean the switches on these, just the actual potentiometer side. It's often not a good idea to put any contact cleaner into 240 volt switches, because sometimes they can make them arc and carry on and basically destroy them. I have seen that happen, so it's better just to leave the switch part alone. It's weird, that one sounds like a switch pot, but it's only the contrast control. Something's clicking. Oh, maybe that's a, oh, that must have a central notch as well. Yeah, didn't realise they made a central notch on those things. Hopefully this is focused reasonably well. That's probably a bit better. Now these tuners, normally it's just a couple of these press fit. That could really do with a bit of a dust and stuff. Really yuck, that is pretty filthy. But there's a couple of these little press fit bits, so you just push that in with your thumb. And the same on the other side, it's that simple. There's your cover off. I'll give that a quick wipe down. Get the worst of the muck off that. Not that important, but while I'm here, I guess might as well. And same with the UHF tuner, absolutely filthy on top. But the UHF tuner is just like a continuous, it's more like a variable capacitor type design inside, so they don't need contacts cleaning in them. Filth is absolutely everywhere. That end of the cabinet's not the best still either. So my hands are getting nice and dirty. But these are your channel wafers. So for each channel, it basically brings in this set of contacts. What I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. And look, these are probably the channel numbers: 8K, 7K, 6K. Not sure what the K means, but it might mean the country it's for. So as we click that around, each one of these little biscuit things move. There's a little tuning, like a little geared sort of rod thing that screws in and out, and I guess changes the frequency as it does so. So that engages with a little push-in gear when we push this knob bit in to engage the tuning. The gear on there engages a little gear, then a big gear, and then that comes through to the other side here, and that engages these little brass gears for whatever channel happens to be selected. It just lifts up to that one, and then when you click around it can do each one in turn. And then down the bottom here we've got the main contacts. So that's what gets dirty, those contacts and all these ones on each biscuit. So it's really just a matter of getting some of that switch cleaner lubricant, get it down in there and go over the whole thing to a degree. Put the knob back on, if I can find the little D shape there, that's it. And we just give that a good working around. Maybe give it another go, bit more on there. And that's usually enough to fix it. And that's probably, is that our UHF on its 01K? It might be our UHF switch, that longer biscuit there. But you can actually take these things out. I don't really want to do it but on this one, but I think you push them one way or the other and they just unclip, because the early G chassis versions of these, the UHF tuner wasn't connected in them for some reason, because I think they thought you might need an extra VHF channel. I think it was like 8 or something, which I don't think was ever used in Australia, but they used to come with channel 8 installed in the UHF position, and then there was a little bag hanging in here somewhere. And you had to take that cover off, flick the little channel 8 tuner out, a little biscuit part, chuck that away and put the one in the bag which was the UHF switching thing, put that in its place, and then when you went to that position it would actually switch voltages down and kick in the UHF tuner. So when this goes to the UHF position, it basically just links through somehow to feed, I guess it takes the IF off the UHF tuner, so these switches here somewhere included in all these contacts is basically the feed from this UHF tuner. This bottom one should come through a wire, which it does, into the, so you've got UIF, so UHF, IF, that's the antenna in socket for the UHF tuner. It's basically independent, sort of. It runs, looks like off the same automatic fine tuning, and that'll just, the red wire is probably just the B+, 12 volts or something, so that's all it's really got, fine tuning, B+, antenna in, and IF out. So that B+ line there will actually be switched by the biscuit in here. So this will have no power on it until this is, the VHF one's put into U position. Then 12 volts will come down this red wire, switch this one on. Looks like it's probably just, not sure, it does have a UHF AFC, so maybe it hooks the automatic fine tuning across as well from the VHF onto the UHF instead. And yeah, then you have this IF line. I think again it just comes in, it gets switched through the biscuit into the IF out of the VHF tuner, which would be this line here. So it just basically in UHF position puts the power to the UHF tuner, puts the automatic fine tuner to it, and instead of the IF coming out of the VHF tuner, it basically switches through to this line that comes from the UHF, and that's how that gets that tuner into the picture. And then when you switch onto another VHF channel, this thing's depowered and it's IF disconnected, and it basically does nothing. So quite a simple little mechanical system to do everything. But I think that'll improve the contacts in that. So it's just a matter, normally these things, very rare they ever failed in any way. They normally just kept going, besides the contacts getting dirty in them. So it's actually a Mitsubishi, so people that make Panasonic and National branded stuff. So Mitsubishi probably didn't bother making their own tuners. At least at this stage they didn't. I guess it probably didn't make sense for everyone to make them. But all the chips in this set are Mitsubishi, so they made their own semiconductors. Very good, reliable ones. Very rare any of the ICs died in any of these Japanese TVs because they're all working well within their specifications and lived a pretty easy life, and so they lasted well, unlike a lot of European ones and stuff that did fail quite a bit. So I'm going to put that spring back on. This dial bit can just go facing any direction at the moment because it's got a thick and a thin piece there. Does this go under that other one? Maybe it does. Or is that lifted up? Seems to, maybe it does just sit in front. I think it was just sitting in front of it, so it probably doesn't matter. And the knobs will line that back up, whereas the UHF one is pressed on. So if you take it off, you've got to get it all lined back up again with a, I guess, tune a channel in and make sure it's facing the right way, because I don't think it's, could be keyed. Sometimes they were, I think, sometimes they weren't. And what's this other thing on the front here? Oh, that's the AFC light. Automatic fine-tuning light there. Or AFT. AFC, I always forget the different ones call it different things. If we can just get that in place, that little dial bit held in there, and we're ready to, nearly ready to put the screws back in. Something hasn't gone in right, I don't think, yet. Oh, the pots probably haven't. Yeah, that's the pots. That's the tuners. Just make sure everything feels like it's fitting in there nicely, so when you put the screws in, you're not going to be crushing anything because it's not sitting in right. And this is where a magnetic screwdriver is a must, because you've got to carry that screw right inside there and get one on. That's a good start. And I can't even see where the holes are for the top ones yet. So I can make it. Oh yeah, it went straight in, amazing. I still have the knack. That one's on a bit of an angle. But yeah, most of these Japanese TVs very simple to work on. Very standard in the way they made them. All pretty much the same as each other, all very simple, standard screws and all that sort of thing. And sometimes these are labelled, usually they're labelled, oh yeah, that one's got V on it. So you know which one goes to the VHF. Often the length and the shape will also give you an idea. Now this should, yeah, just like a D shape in there. Just a matter of lining it up. That knob could really do with a bit of a clean, so I might pull that off again later. Same with that D shape. But this has got this kind of two slots, one wide, one thin. So first you have to get that lined up with the channel number indicator, and then find the actual shaft of the tuner to get the D lined up. Sounds like it's still running at least. Give it a bit more contrast. At least that sort of stays on whatever I put it on. It's probably a bit of, yeah, at least that random sort of sound there is now staying there. Much better. Yeah, the UHF there lights up. Make sure that still turns properly and stuff. Check the purity there, which is very good. White screen, and yeah, that's rather blurry on those dots. Possibly a bit dim. That's not the straightest. Got a little bit of pin cushion. Tilt and convergence is not right, so maybe it looks blurry because the convergence out, or maybe that's just out because the focus is out. That looks terrible for focus. Might even do it on the crosshatch pattern. Normally you do this in a mirror. In this case I'll reach over. Oh, that did come in much sharper. And the convergence is varying a bit with it, but I'm impressed with that. I didn't think it'd come in that well, because it seemed to be out more around the edges, but often it will be. Oh, that checkerboard is so much better. Yeah, the dots are pinpointed now. Ever so slight convergence issues, but don't think that's anything to worry about too much. Wow. So that really just needed a tweak of the focus. Picture probably blooms, changes size a little bit with the contrast and brightness and stuff. I wonder if I should give that brightness a little tweak. The chassis not fully forward at the moment. I should have. Something in the horizontals are a tad noisy. I can hear it squealing a little bit as I move things around. And the whites are pretty white there, pretty bright. Ideally I'd probably have that a little bit higher. I could give just a screen control the slightest little bit more brightness there. But you do just want to make sure when you turn the brightness level right down, which is probably a lot less than you'd normally have things, just make sure there's no retrace lines, little diagonal white lines on the. I could probably do that a tad more, given how far down that brightness control goes. It's sometimes better to have a bit more at the top end. Pretty rare people turn them right down, but yeah, that's plenty of range, I think. Too bright anywhere. Always better to test on a picture, but I guess I can see what the snow looks like. Oh, that's so much sharper, that image now. UHF, just get some snow. And I think, yeah, it's not overly bright, and that's probably more the sort of snow I want. Yeah, you can dim that down, brighten it up. Oh, so much sharper. Didn't have much hope for that tube there for a minute, but you never know with them until you give them a tweak. And the other thing, that grayscale looks pretty right now. I wonder, it's pretty good. It's pretty black and white. I did think it looked a little green, maybe a tad green down there. But you can always give it there's just some pots, trim pots on the top of the neck board here. And it's best to use something insulated, at least so you're insulated from it. So that's a little bluer, might be a little, that is B drive, is it? Yeah, definitely B drive. B, G and R all look similar in this fine print, but that's a bit redder. That's definitely too red. You can sort of adjust them till you get both the white, the black and anything in between. And then we've got blue screen, green screen. I think I see that green coming up there. Almost need a little bit of that green. I'll leave some of it in there, I think. If the picture's too sort of cold, you can add a bit of red. It's not turning, I don't think, that pot. Nope. Try the other end of this tool. No. I need a different screwdriver. Probably a little Phillips one will do. No. A little flat blade go. All these trim pots have different sized things, and sometimes finding the right tool can be a bit of a chore, but it's best not to just use like a bare screwdriver, because there may be quite a bit of voltage on the actual wiper of the pot. So always use something with the insulated handle on it. That one does not want to turn. Oh, it is turning now. Oh, here we go. Feel some red happening now. But it kind of depends on your own choice in a way, how you set the colours. It's too much blue. Too much green. The blue certainly makes the greys greyer. I think that's somewhere where I want to be. That might be a bit better. There's a tad too much blue maybe. Now that I've tweaked up the other one. Bit too warm, so it's a bit too greeny blue. The red just makes it that nice. I prefer a little bit on the red side maybe. That's still not 100% I don't think, but pretty reasonable. Should really let the TV warm up for a while before you do that, but mostly sort of Japanese sets, it doesn't worry them too much. They pretty much come up to colour straight away. Got way too much saturation there. Probably a bit too much brightness. I tend to like the contrast flat out, but or close to flat out. Otherwise it's too much of a sort of soft picture. But all depends on the TV. That's pretty good. Don't know if I can do much about this geometry. Convergence is quite bad, and some of this red convergence not perfect. We may have bumped the magnets a bit when dusting. Oh yeah, that one's moved slightly. I think that made it worse, didn't it? There is like a white paint put on these things normally, so you can tell if it's been bumped. That one's definitely come loose. And the yoke's reasonably straight, but we do have a bit of pin cushion. I don't know if these have a pin cushion adjustment anywhere. Vertical hold, horizontal hold. Got a horizontal phase adjustment. Vertical height, should be a vertical limb. Yeah, there it is. I generally think they just did it all in the circuitry. Something could be a tad out component wise, like a capacitor, but I'm going to do this without touching anything I shouldn't. I guess horizontal phase is the centering, I guess. It's probably a bit more correct like that. This pattern generator isn't perfect. I think that yoke could actually do with a tilt. You can just undo the clamp on the back of the yoke and carefully grab the front rim of it, which I'll show in more detail in another video, I guess, and just tweak that a bit. Just checking your purity afterwards. If you don't slide it back and forwards, it shouldn't affect it, but that still looks perfect. There's no purple patches or greenish patches. Definitely a bit better, but there's still a little bit of bendiness. I mean, a lot of these TVs were never perfect. It was good enough for watching normal television on. Might be our purity magnets anyway, but you can try and put that back to where it was. Normally they should be pretty much where they were. You can see I split these magnets up, so you can see that's affecting things. That's the red, that's the blue coming out. If you move them together, move them separately. Okay, back on this TV again. And I think I was playing around with the convergence, which was still a tad out, but see, it's not too bad. There is a bit of red on the bottom here. Got the picture a little bit straighter. Yeah, the top bit's out as well in the convergence. So it's really just the edges. Mostly the edges, but that swings the rest. It actually needs something rotating slightly here by the look of it, because it's like the convergence is out. The red is slightly off. The red squares off compared to the green one. Because if I get the bottom in, we'd get the top out. So that's interesting. Probably going to have to just... There's the blue. I don't think it should really do that, because the guns are all in line. I don't think the magnets rotate anything like that, so that's a bit of an odd one. Can't say I've really seen that before. But all I can really do is try and get this middle bit as perfect as possible. I mean, these were only for watching normal TV, and they were never that precision or that perfect. That's making it worse that way. I think that's probably as good as I'm going to get it. It's a little bit red out there, which I don't like. But it's kind of a compromise to whichever one you turn. So this is doing what with the red? Yeah, very hard to get the red perfect, which on an inline tube you should be able to get it pretty spot on, really. So this has got some little issues here somewhere. Some of these earlier tubes probably weren't as good as the later ones. Been a while since I've actually worked on a TV. Even when I was still working on TVs, there weren't too many of these ones coming in anymore. That's just how it should be, our purity. Just wondering if the purity is a bit out somewhere. Looks pretty good. But yeah, still not real happy with that bottom part of the screen, but I don't think there's much I can do about it. Other than by messing up the top of the screen. So like I say, all I can do is try and compromise a bit between the top and the bottom, but very hard to get it any better. Puts the blue out. Yeah, it's a bit of an odd one. These inline tubes should come in pretty good. But this one's not really a fan of coming in too well. I've got 3 sets of magnet rings here to adjust. So that's pretty... Might tweak that a bit, try and get these reds in a bit. As soon as you get it, it's almost like the red guns not as focused as the other one, so it's possible it is actually the case that the gun's not so good and it's not putting as fine a dot on the screen, something. Not impossible, but things like that can happen as they get older. But yeah, it's near impossible to get it perfect. All I can do is try and get this middle bit, but even then, every time I tweak it, it tends to put it out a bit. Yeah, that's kind of it, but then that's dropping it out again. That's pushing it sideways, and then it comes out the other side, so it's, yeah, that's about as good as I'm going to get it, I think. Certainly not ideal, but it's not too bad. Once we've got good purity there, does almost look a little bit out there. Is that, or is that my imagination? Well, it looks alright on the camera. It's certainly not out on the red, which was where it would show. I think it's just the lighting in here is a bit funny. So we've lost our fine tuning a little bit on that too, probably, but oh, I've actually got to fix that AFT button. That's probably why the light's not on, so that's still working. And the other thing I noticed with this set is it was squealing a bit in the horizontal. I can certainly still hear it. It's not the quietest TV in history, but they all make a bit of a noise. It was always how you knew they were running. As you could hear the high-pitched squeal, as well as there's a bit of a buzz coming from the vertical side of the yoke. It's never usually the yoke, it's usually the line output transformer or something, pincushion circuit or something, little transducers they have in some of them. Or it's the ferrite's loose on the line output transformer. I don't think the drive transformer usually causes it. I can't actually see anything related to pincushion in this TV. Carefully pull that out. The chassis should be pretty safe, but you don't want to be touching these horizontal output transistors or anything like that. It must have some sort of inductor here somewhere. Oh, there is an inductor on its side there. No sign of anything coming from it. Some other capacitors down there. Looks like it's a link wire or something. Maybe that's something to do with the width or the like. But whatever it is, seems to have... There's not really much in this TV to do it. Probably the line output transformer is the most likely thing. Sometimes the ferrite comes loose on those, but it doesn't want to do it now. Very odd. Don't think this thing even has a switching transformer. I think they're just a linear regulator. Yeah. Oh well, I can't get it to do it now. Oh, better not poke the screwdriver under the line output. I might touch one of the pins under there. The older the TV, the more things it can be. They have more inductors and stuff that can vibrate. Sometimes like the Phillips's, I think I've got one here somewhere, KT3 chassis, and I think the earlier ones, K9 and stuff, they had a couple of little inductors leading to the heaters on the neck board that often vibrated. Some of the Samsung chassis had like a little small transformer, which was the pincushion circuit. It's part of the inductor for that and possibly the width. and the ferrite would break on those. You unsolder them off the board and look usually underneath, I think it was, they cracked. You could actually pull the ferrite, I think the half of it out, or the broken bit out, and just glue it with some araldite, and that would fix that. The sort of 2 bits of ferrite that come out of these line output transformers, I think it was mainly the national TVs used to do it. They come loose, they've just got like a metal clamp over them. This one's a bit more messy, a bit harder to see. And you just take the metal clamp off the whole, shake it around, you pull the whole top half, like sort of horseshoe shaped piece, and again put a bit of araldite or quick grip or some sort of glue in there so the two faces don't vibrate against each other so noisily. Unless it was just something to do with it being off frequency or something. I guess that's the other thing. I could turn off the pattern generator, and sometimes I make different noises depending. It's usually just the vertical gets noisy when there's no vertical sync. But no, I can't get it to do it now. So I think this TV's pretty well done what I can do with it. I've just got to fix that AFT switch that I snapped off when I was vacuuming on it, or when I moved the board. Something I forgot easily happens on these things. You've got to be very careful when there's those little plastic switches. But I'll fix it with a bit of wire. It does seem to be a little noisier now. It is something that's definitely making quite the squealy noise. Not sure it's really changing though. I'm not used to hearing it so much now, so it probably sounds louder than what I'm used to, because I haven't really heard a lot of these sets running, but that's noisier than that Philips one I looked at. It may just be the yoke. It sort of seems to be centred around that area somewhere. So maybe they're just a bit noisier than some other sets, but I think that's got this set all going. We've done the tuners, the pots, checked the solder joints and gone over a couple, adjusted the focus, tweaked the convergence, though I don't think it came up much better. Done the actual rotation of the yoke, which is just, there's like a sardine can opener looking thing here. I guess we should move over to the other side. But yeah, just this thing here on the yoke looks a bit like a sardine tin key, and you just undo that, loosen it off, try not to move it backwards and forwards, and you can grab the big plastic rim of the front of the yoke. Don't touch any of the connections at the back or the wiring if you can help it. Even though it is insulated, it's better not to touch any of that, and you can just rotate the thing. It may be a bit stuck to either to the neck where this clamp is, or where the wedges are sometimes, but if you give it a good twist, it'll break free. And just, like I say, try not to move it back or forwards. I mean, the wedges normally will reseat it where it was, because that'll adjust your purity and upset that if you move it forward or back. But if you just give it a slight rotation, when the pitch is a bit tilted, you can get that part right. Sometimes you can also, if you take the wedges out by wobbling it around, you can fix other slight geometry issues. But this one's good enough, probably about as good as it ever was, or maybe it's aged a bit and gone off a little bit over the years, but these TVs were never super precision. They're only just used for obviously analog TV broadcasts and VHS video and stuff, so they were never perfection like a computer monitor or something needs to be, because no one really cared that much about perfect geometry on these things. But anyway, thanks for watching. Okay, just giving this thing a clean up on the cabinet, and it's come up very close to new condition. About the only problem is around this volume control, which has been used a lot. Some of the paint basically and the lettering has worn off. So a little bit of damage there. But other than that, this thing's actually still in near new condition, which is good. So cabinet's pretty good. I haven't given the back a full clean. That would take quite a lot of work to get the back, all the dust off the back and the antennas and stuff. But this is cleaned up really well. I'm surprised just how good condition this is in. It had quite a bit of tar or other black muck on it, but yeah, come up really well.